Anderson at his best represents a cinema of big swings and bold statements. Perhaps not everything lands, but there's enough that does to make this glorious mess of a movie one of the most thrilling cinema events of the year.
It's impossible to overstate how much fun this thing is, with twists and welcome detours along the way.
A beautifully choreographed fever dream of resistance and reckoning, blending absurdist satire with poignant meditation on parental legacy.
The film never flags, bounding from moments of high tension to ones that are sublime. The comedy, meanwhile, always feels integral. The first half hour or so of One Battle is as hot as a pistol, buzzing with frenetic energy while clearly establishing the main characters, their conflict, and their motivations. It's frenzied, but it's grounded, with the story's stakes clearly set.
What?
Hey everyone, this is Abra, and I'm back to give my 2 cents on One Battle After Another by Paul Thomas Anderson. Whew. Wow, I am really confused on this one because it seems like the critics are just really eating this up. One Battle After Another currently has a 95% from critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and 85% on the popcorn meter from viewers. I just don't get it. This movie just felt like a crazy fever dream, chaotic mess. It's about a group of revolutionary terrorists that are intent on breaking up the capitalist system and changing the world. It consists of a lot of leftist ideology. If you're a conservative, you're going to see a lot of woke messaging.
It's not that hard. They, them.
And imagery in the movie. But just as a movie in general, this movie just really vexed me. I don't get the praise for it. The premise of the movie is you have this revolutionary group called I think it was the French 75. They go through different areas like banks and government buildings, planting bombs and doing terrorist acts to try to raise awareness to their cause. The basic idea is they don't want anyone telling them what to do with their bodies, their money. They don't want borders. They seemed more like an anarchist group than, say, a socialist or communist type of group. It's funny, they seemed like they were for the working man, and yet they were willing to carry out acts of violence that would hurt the very people that they supposedly wanted to represent. They seemed very idealistic, but not really well informed. The movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Bob and Teyana Taylor as Perfidia Beverly Hills, and she comes from a long line of revolutionaries. Perfidia is kind of like the main force in the heart in the movement. Her character really came across as narcissistic, and she really demonstrates that at the end of the day, she only really cares about herself. There comes a point in the movie where she ends up coming across Sean Penn's character, who plays the very over-the-top Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw. He's assigned to the border, and he takes pleasure in making illegal immigrants' lives pure hell. Perfidia and Lockjaw end up having a chance meeting one day, which involves some very odd sexual interactions. And this kicks off Lockjaw's obsession with Perfidia that lasts for quite some time.
I'll be seeing you very soon.
Leonardo DiCaprio's character Bob Ferguson and Teyana Taylor's Perfidia Beverly Hills end up developing a relationship, and Perfidia ends up getting pregnant. However, she's not really the motherly, nurturing type. Even though she's pregnant, she still maintains the same gung-ho, militant behavior that she did from the very beginning of her movement. In fact, Bob, DiCaprio's character, he seems to show more concern for her well-being and their future child than Perfidia does. One day, through a series of events, Perfidia ends up taking things too far, and a bystander ends up getting killed during one of their acts of violence. This freaks out the rest of the French 75 and causes them to have to flee in a panic. Things don't end up going too well for Perfidia. She ends up making a really shady deal with Sean Penn's character, Lockjaw, seemingly abandoning all of her hardcore beliefs and leaving Bob to have to raise their young infant on his own. Flash forward 16 years, and the baby, Willa Ferguson, played by Chase Infinity, is now a 16-year-old spicy young woman who believes her mother died and pretty much having to raise her father, Bob, who is now just essentially a brain-fried pothead. Come to find out, Pravidia has double-crossed Sean Penn's character Lockjaw, and he now has the motivation to not only track her down, but also her one-time lover Bob and their daughter Willa. On the surface, when you describe the movie, it doesn't sound too bad. But believe me when I say that I felt every minute of this film. I found myself constantly checking my watch and wondering when the heck everything would be wrapped up and the credits would roll. The main problem with this movie for me was just the message. It was so blatant and one-sided in its depiction of the border crisis. All of the border agents and law enforcement were portrayed as white males and came across as extremely bigoted. In fact, all of the authority figures at odds with the main characters were portrayed as over-the-top, loopy white males. The dialogue was another thing that just was absolutely ridiculous, to the point of being banal at times. There were moments when I was trying to figure out if this was supposed to be some sort of parody. Sean Penn's character, Lockjaw, was just so over the top and ridiculous. It felt like an SNL skit, and much of the imagery in the film was just really disgusting, and it was very obvious that it was trying to push a progressive agenda. Despite that, I do have to give credit where credit is due. Sean Penn, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Benicio del Toro did very well in portraying their characters, and their performances were quite praiseworthy. However, it was just how the characters were written that I just found completely ridiculous and at points borderline satirical. The only character that I really felt any sympathy for was Willa Ferguson, Bob and Pravidia's daughter. She found herself in this situation where she was abandoned by her mother, and unfortunately she had a father that wasn't really present in her life. He spent half the time smoking marijuana. The pro-open borders and illegal immigrant message throughout the film was quite glaring and obvious. Other than Sean Penn's over-the-top, ridiculous Lockjaw character, Teyana Taylor's Perfidia character was probably the second most annoying thing about the movie. It was obvious that she was narcissistic, and she really didn't care anything about her movement, because at the first sign of threat to her freedom, she had absolutely no qualms with throwing everyone else under the bus. There were several times in the movie where scenes just felt unnecessary or just overly long. And in terms of the cinematography, I didn't find anything really remarkable until maybe the last 30 minutes of the film. There was a very stylized and interesting chase scene that I found very creative. Other than that, though, again, it was just very bland. For me, I felt like Paul Thomas Anderson decided to put the message before the art. The only thing that really shined in the film were the performances by Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, and Benicio del Toro. Again, I'm not sure why everyone seems to be singing the movie's praises on the review sites. Perhaps it's a case of we've been forced to endure mediocrity for so long that when something just a little bit more comes along, we give it far more praise than it's really due. I'd recommend waiting on this one. Perhaps see it when it's streaming. Well, that's my 2 cents on One Battle After Another. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, take care.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you. Viva la revolution!